It gives me great delight to introduce our keynote speaker, the Honourable John Graham. Get this, John, if I may be so casual, is New South Wales Special Minister of State, Minister for Roads, Minister for the Arts, Minister for Music and the Nighttime Economy, Minister for Jobs and Tourism, and Deputy Leader of the Government in the Legislative Council. That's a lot. So from all that, I reckon it's probably just easier to make the leap and say he's smart, adventurous, cultured, pretty good at fronting estimates, and you sound like a good time. So to speak on driving Greater Western Sydney forward, please welcome the Minister for Everything, John Graham.
Well, thanks so much, Faith, for that introduction. If we'd been in the Parliament, I would have moved an extension of time there to allow you to continue. I'll, of course, begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on Indigenous land and pay respect to Elders past and present. My enormous thanks to the team for having me here today, to Chris Brown, to Jennifer Westacott, to Adam Leto. Thank you for everything that you do, really driving these discussions along in Sydney. It makes a huge difference to the city over time, so I'm delighted to be here to be a part of this. It's a delight to be able to recognise just how nationally significant the Greater Western Sydney region is. This is a representation of modern Australia. It's the powerhouse of growth, especially in the housing sector, and of course, even more exciting from a national point of view as the airport infrastructure comes into place. I wanted to give you some idea of what the government's priorities are, particularly in my portfolios. No discussion about the government's priorities could fail to start with the Premier's clear priority about housing and the housing challenge in New South Wales. The thing I'm very conscious of in my areas is any discussion about housing rapidly becomes a transport discussion, and any housing and transport discussion rapidly becomes a discussion about what sort of neighbourhoods, what sort of communities we have in our city. So as we tackle that housing challenge, from a government point of view, one of the first things we need to do is ensure quality building. That's why the Building Commissioner and my colleague Annalak Chanthavong have been working so hard on that quality issue. I want to recognise some of the work of the former government, but that is essential as we tackle this challenge. From my point of view, the second priority is that we have to build communities, not simply houses. We've got to talk about the transport challenge, the open space, the jobs, and also the entertainment challenge as we build new neighbourhoods, build new communities. And we want to build vibrant communities. That is why the government, in its early months, has made that very clear with some of its early decisions. We want those communities, those neighbourhoods, to be able to come alive during the day and during the night. I want to recognise, as I talk about Western Sydney, both the pressures and the potential. One of those pressures is the burden of tolling. And the government's taken a step forward earlier in the week to acknowledge just how big that pressure is. Modelling by New South Wales Treasury, the first modelling of this question was released on Monday and established that drivers across the state, but mainly centred here in Western Sydney, are set to pay a minimum of $123 billion in tolls in today's dollars by 2060. That's the bill that has been left with drivers by those contracts signed by former governments. It's been important to me to be upfront about the cost of that bill. These are remarkable bits of infrastructure that have been built, but to me this has got to be a discussion both about the benefits and also the costs of those pieces of infrastructure, and crucially who's bearing the burden of those costs. And it does fall heavily on Western Sydney. I strongly believe that those toll costs should not be kept hidden. They should not be a state secret. They should be part of an honest discussion that we have about how we fund infrastructure and also who bears the burden of the funding of infrastructure over the decades. So I want to recognise that pressure in particular, but above all, this morning what I'd like to recognise is the potential of this area. In the portfolios that I'm dealing with, I really see them as the enabling parts of government, the parts of government that are crucial to Sydney or the state reaching its potential in roads, in tourism, in culture, and also in vibrancy. The government has legislation in front of the Parliament at the moment that we think will make a big difference to neighbourhoods becoming more vibrant, protecting venues from sound and noise complaints and creating precincts that will enable those neighbourhoods to flourish. I'll talk mainly about roads and infrastructure today, but I did want to emphasise that this vibrancy agenda is very, very important to Western Sydney. When we campaigned on this before 2019, and I've campaigned on it a little bit since, but before 2019, the biggest reaction to this vibrancy agenda was not in Pyrmont, it was actually in Penrith. And the key to why that was the case was this is an agenda driven by young citizens of the city. Young areas, dynamic areas, areas with potential were really where we were getting the biggest reaction to this agenda, and Western Sydney matches all those demographics. So I did want to say that exciting agenda is very much a Western Sydney agenda and perhaps a topic for a future occasion. Turning to roads and infrastructure though, I did want to address directly the federal infrastructure review and the recent decision of the federal government. I can quote the Treasurer directly, who said he was disappointed with the capital D, and it's a disappointment I share. It's true that yesterday's decision will cost the state an estimated $1.4 billion over the next 4-year budget cycle. When the federal government said funding would not be taken away from projects that are already contracted, we do expect them to keep their word. And that is of concern when it comes to the M7, M12 project specifically. If you visited the construction site of the M7, M12 junction today, you'd find land cleared and bulldozers moving earth. We want to see this funding returned. Our expectation is that the federal government will move heaven and earth to fix this funding. That's the state's expectation. New South Wales is open to working with the Commonwealth to making sure that the infrastructure pipeline is achievable, that it supports housing delivery, that it doesn't add to inflation. And I do want to emphasise that we're currently in dialogue with the Commonwealth Government about these matters, but it is the state's view that any proposal by the Commonwealth to withdraw funding from projects that are in delivery or to not contribute the Commonwealth share to cost overruns is simply cost shifting. Some of the principles that the state has advocated during this process are that New South Wales should at least retain the existing level of Commonwealth infrastructure funding, that projects that are in delivery should not have funding withdrawn, that we should continue funding cost overruns together as we have previously with the existing funding splits, and crucially, in the longer term, the Commonwealth should increase New South Wales' share of that 10-year infrastructure pipeline to recognise the population share that New South Wales has. That is 32%, moves around a little, but 32% at the moment, compared to 23% of that pipeline of infrastructure funding. And that is an issue for the state. A longer-term discussion we'll continue to have with the Commonwealth. We value the strong and proactive partnership between the governments, and we're still very much talking to the federal government to get the best deal we can for New South Wales. In the meantime, the New South Wales government's plan is to keep building and to keep planning for the future, especially in this region in Western Sydney. To give you some idea of those plans to keep building, I'm pleased to say in the recent state budget, we not only maintained the existing capital funding over the forward estimates, but increased it over the 4 years. The state's plan is to build at the rate of an average of $29 billion per annum over the forwards. The Commonwealth's plans represent only around 10% of this. So it gives you some idea of the significant state plans in the infrastructure space. And I do want to update you this morning about some of those plans as we keep planning for the future of this area, and in particular the Western Sydney Airport precinct. The Western Sydney Airport and the broader airport precinct evolving around it are one of Australia's largest infrastructure and city shaping programs. This development will transform Western Sydney in the coming decades and unlock social and economic opportunity for the long-standing communities of today, but also for the 2 million people who are expected to live in the region by 2036. The precinct presents increasing opportunities to build new communities, including in the neighbouring growth areas, with more services, turn-up-and-go travel options, housing, and new and better jobs all join this region. 28,000 jobs by 2031 are expected to be created by the opening of the Western Sydney Airport. To support this growth, the government today is releasing the Western Sydney Airport Precinct Strategy, showing the government's vision for how freight networks, roads, metro, buses and active transport will connect and evolve in and around the airport precinct. It sets out a government vision to drive transport outcomes, to build the precinct and to show how communities and surrounding metropolitan areas will connect to the precinct. It builds on the work that's been done, but will be a foundational document to support future planning and decision making. It's important that we set a clear direction for ourselves, but also that government's able to articulate that so that other parts of the state, parts of the city, can align around that vision. More than $600 million has been committed to projects in the area in the recent state budget. That builds on more than $15 billion of investment by the New South Wales and Commonwealth governments in road, metro and rail infrastructure projects in the precinct. There is a significant amount of investment needed in the next 30 plus years to enable this vision to take place, and I don't want to sugarcoat that. The challenge is very significant, but it starts with setting out a plan about where we want to head, and today we take another step on that journey. Transport infrastructure and services will be delivered in stages, and we'll work through that process, including with the community. On the roads front, the first tranche of road development supporting the airport precinct is nearing completion, and of course that includes the Northern Road and Bringelly Road upgrades delivered in 2022 and 2020, the Mamre Road Stage 1 upgrade, which will commence in 2024, and interim safety and access improvements on Elizabeth Drive, absolutely crucial to this precinct, will commence next year. My colleague Joe Halen is very focused on the public transport challenges around the precinct, and that's why the government announced $302 million for new bus services to provide a public transport option, especially for workers, but for commuters and visitors in Western Sydney. And that has started the process of planning, not to mention the significant metro investments that we've continued, recognising the work of the former government. So that planning is underway. We take a step forward today. It recognises the significant pressures on the state as the state continues to grow. But it recognises the view that the Premier's made very clear, that Sydney's housing affordability crisis cannot simply be solved with greenfield development in the outer suburbs, under pressure from the 37% of overseas migration that's attracted to New South Wales. And as we know, that migration number has increased greatly recently. The New South Wales population is projected to increase to over 12 million by 2056. We want to meet the federal government's housing challenge, That housing challenge from the federal government is being met by a responsive, by a proactive state government response led by the Premier, but we have to make the crucial transport and infrastructure decisions that allow that to take place as well. As the Premier's made clear, the real concern in the leadership of the government is if we can't solve that housing challenge for Sydney, if we can't solve it for New South Wales, this state, this city and this region will simply lose the young and talented workers that really make up our state's greatest asset over coming decades. That is the fear of the government leadership at the moment. That's why we have made housing such a challenge. In order to do it, we need to keep building. We've done that in the state budget. We need to keep planning. We do that some more today. There are significant challenges to come, but I'm delighted to be here to be able to talk about some of those early government priorities.
I hate the tub chairs, but I'll go anyway. Well, you only went through like a couple of your 17 portfolios, so you've left plenty to talk about. I think this is the third time I've sat with John in the past month talking about policy stuff. So firstly, I appreciate considering the incredible portfolio thing you have, as well as keeping an upper house in check for your time. Mate, we've got to start with the big one. Yesterday, it's fair to say all of us were taken a bit by surprise, and probably including the state's roads minister, when Canberra determined that keeping its promises wasn't a big priority, and a range of things, particularly the M12, M7 interchange, got yanked. I know you're continuing discussions with your federal colleagues. I know I'm off to Canberra with Adam in a couple of weeks' time to see Minister King and Prime Minister and others to talk about a range of things, and that's just gone to the top of the agenda. Has Canberra just determined that the M12 now has a toll attached to it? Does that free road just become a paid road as a result of the federal money disappearing?
Well, look, it's a good question about how we've got to here. I think surprised is too strong. I do want to recognise there have been discussions with the Commonwealth.
Yeah, we were surprised you weren't, okay.
But our concern is we've been talking, but the Commonwealth in the end hasn't necessarily been listening on some of these issues. But I do want to acknowledge that the Commonwealth has been talking to the state behind the scenes. It is a surprise to see a project under contract come under question, and we do strongly expect the federal government to look at that issue. That principle had been outlined, that those projects under contract should not be under question, and I don't need to say in this room how crucial that project is to the future development of this precinct, to Western Sydney, to New South Wales as a whole. Will it become a toll road? Well, the state government doesn't want to be imposing new tolls. Our expectation is the federal government will fix this funding, as I've made clear. We're in good dialogue. We have no guarantees at this moment.
I might have a little more to say when I put my cranky pants on for the chairman's speech later. Turning to the positive stuff, you've just announced the long-term vision. I appreciate vision means unfunded for now, in vision rather than plan when money comes, but I appreciate the 30-year vision looking forward for the Aerotropolis precinct. Part of our concern has been big vision for Aerotropolis, but not enough delivery till now. Something we're about to address, and we produced our own report on today. How does the vision become reality? What's the process for now? What role do we all have? WAPCA as an agency, your own transport agencies, the community more generally. How do we get to be part of that vision, to work on particularly timing? There's no use having an Aerotropolis if you can't get to it and can't get around it and can't get in and out of it. So what's next steps?
Yeah, well, firstly, I want to say, look, significant funding in the budget, and I do want to dwell on that because I think that would have been a surprise to people who've been following this discussion closely, that the first Min's government budget would have increased the capital expenditure in the state. That wasn't the discussion going in, but we said we wanted to keep building, and the numbers show
we were ready for the austerity budget, and it wasn't nearly as bad as we had hoped. You're right.
Yeah, on the capital side, we've kept building, and that's important. So there is money flowing over future years, significant money, particularly compared to the Commonwealth funding. Next steps, We have to resolve these discussions with the Commonwealth very shortly. That's crucial. And then thirdly, I want to recognise the work that you've done, that this organisation's done, but everyone in the room's done. We've got to keep talking about the significant challenges, keep planning and working through how to build the next stages. There's no shortcuts here, but we've got to build on the work and tackle the significant challenges that are really about reaching the potential of this region.
I know when you pull business cards out, they're like A3 size to quote your entire title on it, but one of them is Minister for Jobs, and you and I know in the scope, it's like Prue Carr as Minister for Western Sydney. It's sort of an internal advocate lobbyist role rather than a legislative role as much. It's not big vehicles you have. With that influence, I think we all look to you, we're all cheering on confronting a housing crisis, absolutely. But it's not as if we want Western Sydney to get back to where it was before, and Kirsten spoke about earlier from a planning perspective, it's not housing at the expense of jobs. It's not jobs or housing, it's housing and jobs and vibrancy and amenity all together that get a region that we can be proud of, and a region that isn't considered a dumping ground of migrants and population growth. So with that in mind, there's a whole lot of industrial action across our city, our Western City, that has a whole lot of roads not existing to it. The Mamre roads, and I can credit you, I think the government has now finally solved the Moorebank weave. The M5 will no longer be beset through the government, Fed State and Logos particularly, the Moorebank intermodal, so we can tick that off our list, but there's a stack of others. Are you able to cut through the noise of housing to remind your cabinet colleagues that jobs hasn't disappeared as well, and often they need roads to go with them so we can access those jobs?
Yeah, well look, I think the jobs agenda is hugely important. I want to recognise the work that Kirsten and the planning team are doing. It's very exciting to see the plans developing and starting to roll
this
out.
Break out of love with transport and planning is starting to get disconcerting. Had it all last night, we had it this morning. I mean, I like a good traditional fight that's happening, but they are as one.
But look, I think the way I'd put it is this. I think the Premier's right to focus exclusively on housing and to drive a clarifying call to tackle that challenge. He's been talking about it for nearly 12 months now, but I really feel like that message has got through publicly, even just in the last few weeks, the level at which the urgency of which is required. Of course, my view is the discussion will then evolve into one about jobs, open space, communities, and I hope vibrant communities. I hope communities, especially after COVID, that people are happy to live and work in, but they need to work there too. So I think it's been an important moment for the government to say our number one priority is housing, but I think you will see this discussion evolve.
A couple more roads things, then we'll move to your 17 other portfolios. We can't sit in Olympic Park, talk roads and not think about that magnificent tribute to really shitty planning, which is the Underwood Road roundabout that sits over here, the roundabout, the worst roundabout on the face of the earth. The good news is yesterday, it wasn't chopped by the feds. The bad news is there wasn't enough money done to actually do the roundabout yet either. So it sits like the roundabout in permanent limbo, just doing this. In fact, doing that, because you can't go that quick on that roundabout. Innovative solution time, not business as usual. You've got, the problem is caused by, I think, Strathfield, Auburn Council, whichever genius approved the DFO to be dropped in the middle of a roundabout. And it's not even a very good shopping centre, let alone it's a pain in the arse for anyone trying to access Olympic Park. Is there a chance that something like a compulsory acquisition, they, take instead of the hundreds of millions of dollars, we're talking a roundabout that requires almost $500 million to fix. It is quite ludicrous. Is there a more innovative solution to take back that shopping centre, maybe use the land needed to fix a traffic intersection, and then add it to the housing stock at the back end with some towers? Are you open to all sorts of solutions to solve the stupidest traffic blockage in New South Wales?
Well, I accept that this is Australia's worst roundabout, although I note you've upgraded it to the world's worst roundabout. I'm not going to argue the toss on that, by the way. It may well be. I just don't have advice on that this morning. But look, I think that sort of solution, that sort of question should be on the table in a discussion. I guess the point I'd make is it's only possible to look at those issues, given the work that Kirsten and the planning team are doing given the Premier's clarion call to address housing, we are now in a position, I feel, as a member of the government, to really look at some different ways to solve old problems.
I mean, the sneakers aren't even that cheap there, so frankly, we can do without it. The last road's one for you. Maybe another innovative, crazy brownie solution. We're struggling constantly with local councils and local communities saying they've got tollways running through the guts. They're paying high tolls. What do they get from it? How about a solution where government and the toll road operators together might say, maybe we trial it on the M5 and says, here's a billboard each. Here's a billboard for Canterbury Bankstown Council, here's one for Liverpool Council, here's one for Campbelltown Council. You get it for free to put a sign up about the vibrancy taking place in the city you're driving past and not getting off to observe. If it works, we can maybe go to the M7 and the M4, but something like that would really be a community compact between the government, the toll road operator and the communities that are often carved apart by and separated by toll roads. They're a necessary evil, I grant you that, but wouldn't it be nice to try and use them? And while I'm at it, you're the Minister for the Arts, so we're going to get Jeff Kennett-style coloured pillars on all the... They're going to be prettier tollways than we've had in the past.
Well, look, I love a bright idea, and I'm open to this billboard one you're pitching on our toll roads. We're in discussions with the private toll operator at the moment. Their discussions about the government's number one priority, dealing with that toll burden. So that's top priority. But if other good things come out of it, if other good ideas are able to be dealt with in it, I'm very open to that. The first one will be a tough discussion. I'm really pleased that Transurban have been open and engaged in having that tough discussion. I've called for help and asked Alan Fells to step in as well, which I think is important to getting a good deal for the public. But your bright idea, I'm very happy to have in that discussion.
Brought to you, billboards from Transurban, with love from Transurban. I said, you're also the Minister for a bunch of things. Of all your titles, there's one thing not on your list, which is effectively the Minister for Cities. And we complained a bit at the time that this new government hasn't had a Minister for Cities. You are effectively between transport, vibrancy, jobs, etc. With that, you're also Minister for Tourism. We have a burgeoning tourism industry with an airport due to open in 2 years in our part of the world. There's a couple of, we had a dinner recently and we had, 20 tourism people around a table, and uniquely, the only time in 30 years as my advocate for tourism, not one person raised the marketing issue or even the budgets. They all raised with you the need for you to be an advocate on infrastructure, on supply side stuff. So with that in mind, the major events sector said, when we've got a big gig coming to town, we need some sort of coordinator who can go and deal with local government, private sector agencies. We had the arts say, can you help us drive infrastructure, new theatres, etc. We had the tourism industry talk about trying to help not turn every single hotel into an apartment block at the current pressure for housing. So firstly, what's your appetite to be that advocate for supply side when it's not really it's your job as the advocate, not as a legislator? And a couple of specifics. Can we save the goddamn Roxy Theatre in Parramatta by maybe a bit of compulsory acquisition? Not only because I saw Star Wars there in 1977, but it's one of the great cultural pieces and would form a great part of the new civic link in Parramatta. And so that sort of appetite for that interventionist position.
All right, you've covered a bit of ground there, so I'll try.
Got lots of portfolios. I got a bundle.
I'll try and do that justice. Look, I think one of the real benefits of having these portfolios together is the momentum you can get up across government with the things you touch on, and that's the view you're just putting then is exactly the view that's been put to me by industry across the state. It's most urgent in Western Sydney because of the airport opening, and I just want to acknowledge how urgent that is. We are in the window where if we don't act now, we won't be ready then. So it's an urgent discussion as well. I'm certainly looking forward to playing that advocate role in relation to the industry right across the board. On the Roxy, I want to recognise the former minister for finally kicking off the process that the government had talked about previously, but Ben Franklin got it moving to look at actually saving the Roxy.
Because the private sector is the problem here. We need the government to be the saviour. Business has failed us on the Roxy, so hopefully the government can step in.
We're committed to that process and it's underway. In my mind, this is a discussion about how we save the Roxy, not whether it should be saved. We've got a couple of different options, including the fact that we've said we'll roll out the Heritage Airspace scheme much more broadly than the City of Sydney. It should be in place in Parramatta. It might play a role here. Obviously, Kirsten's got some other pressing priorities at the moment, but it is one that the government's made a commitment to rolling out that scheme. It could be part of the answer here.
Last one for you, because the clock tells us we're almost done. You guys can't see, but it screams at me, get off stage. Another advocacy role for the state government as a whole to the federal government. That airport does open in 2 years' time. If ever there was a time a government could put on its own, big boy, big girl pants and take on the red rat, with Qantas having the abuses it's committed against the Australian people in recent times, surely we can push together to get the federal government to designate Western Sydney Airport not only a 24-hour, commit to be a 24-hour airport, but an open skies airport. Let's not have the crappy old bilateral agreements where Qantas goes out and says, no one can fly here. If we can't, we have to monopolise everything. Qatar's waiting in the wings, there's other airlines. Can we, a state government and a Western Sydney, work together, as happens in other parts of the country, and go to Canberra and say, we demand that airport be open skies. We demand we don't have the usual crappy diplomatic, Qantas-constrained realities that stop people flying in to that airport. We know it's going to be a slow start to a brand new airport. Let's not condemn it to the stupid old regulatory regimes that inhibits real growth of carriers and real growth of demand. To work together with the state government to lobby the federal government to designate it open skies.
Look, it's certainly an issue I've had raised with me in multiple places by industry, so I understand the significance of the issue. Overall, look, I understand the incredible significance of airports to how cities work, and the potential of this we've got to reach in whatever way we can. We might focus on the immediate discussions with the federal government and see how that goes before raising this issue. But yeah, look, I'm very open to us advocating to really hit the potential of Western Sydney Airport.
I know it's fiscally constrained. This costs nobody anything except maybe a bit of Qantas pride to open up to the rest of the world to come in and fly here. So we'll keep knocking. Ladies and gentlemen, as they say about him, everything, everywhere, all at once, the Minister for Everything, John Graham. Speaking of everything all at once, and for the record, I've never spoken with Simon about Open Skies Airport ever. Please welcome the Chief Executive of Australia's newest, greatest airport.
Thank you very much. So I'd start by acknowledging that we're on the lands of the Wangal people of the Great Darug Nation. And I wanted to borrow a couple of words of Darug. Warami, welcome, Minister, and Didjurigor, thank you. Thank you for your comments today and for joining us today. Warami doesn't translate well. Warami is more than welcome. Warami is, I see you, I see your spirit, I walk with you on these lands. And it's quite clear from your talk today that you actually see Western Sydney and you walk with us on our lands. So thank you for that. Didjurigor. Congratulations as well on the release of Connecting Western Sydney 30-year integrated transport plan. While the airport will create fundamental shifts in the local and national economy, roads and public transport is a key enabling infrastructure to propel Western Sydney into the future. Significant investment is needed in the next 30 years to make the vision a reality, and setting out a plan for transport and services delivered in stages helps everyone with that, creating that vision. It's clear that Western Sydney is a priority for you and for the New South Wales Government. I think everyone here today would agree that this is the decade for Western Sydney, a region with cultural diversity, rich First Nations heritage, with a work ethic and entrepreneurial spirit across its many communities as its competitive advantage. We're in an incredible transformation of this exciting region. Already, 9 of the top 10 fastest growing local government areas are in Western Sydney. we're expecting an unprecedented growth by almost 1/3 over the next 20 years, an increase of more than 830,000 people to over 3.4 million. Imagine twice the population of the entire ACT moving into Western Sydney in that period. Western Sydney International Airport is one of the catalysts for the amazing socio-economic transformation that will occur across the West. Airports are proven to create jobs and attract private and public sector investment. We're already seeing that effect in Western Sydney. The opportunity for employment in Western Sydney, which our new airport will stimulate, will be a multi-generational game changer. Kids who aren't born yet will have a better life, will have better opportunities because they'll have more choice for better jobs closer to home. WSI has a roadmap to become Sydney's largest airport and primary international gateway. Within a few short years of opening, around 10 million people a year will arrive into Western Sydney through WSI. It's about the size of Adelaide Airport today. The potential for tourism uplift is incredible, and the time for governments and the tourism industry to act, plan and invest to maximise the benefit is now. Also vital to getting the most out of the WSI opportunity is for the West is ensuring the right transport connections to enable commerce, worker access and to optimise sustainable outcomes. Minister, I thank you for your vision and look forward to joining the region's leaders to work with you and the New South Wales Government more broadly to maximise the opportunity revolution set to occur across the West with the right policy and investment settings. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the Minister.